Welcome to the Korea Society's live webcast. I'm Jayo, Senior Director of Arts and Culture. Riding the Korean wave sweeping the world, the traditional Korean costumes have become increasingly visible in global media. In 2021, Hanbok, the generic term referring to traditional style Korean clothing, was registered in the Oxford English Dictionary. The Korea Society is proud to present a comprehensive series of 4 lectures, of which tonight is the second one by Dr. Minjee Kim. Minjee Kim is a historian and lecturer specializing in Korean dress and textiles based in the San Francisco Bay Area. She received her PhD from Seoul National University and formerly taught at Sunju Kijang College, Seoul National University, and Academy of Art University in San Francisco. She is co-editor of the forthcoming book, Dress History in Korea, Critical Perspectives on Primary Sources. A quick reminder to our viewers, you can send your questions for Dr. Kim via Twitter at Korea Society Art or email artsandculture@koreasociety.org. And welcome back to the Korea Society, Dr. Kim, and the screen is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this program. Thank you, Jay, for the kind introduction. And again, I appreciate the Korea Society for hosting this timely lecture series on Hanbok. Let me begin with a brief recap of last lecture. If you haven't watched it, the recording is available at this link. In the last talk, I addressed that the concept of Korean ethnic clothing, although existed for a long period, which can extend it back nearly 2 millennia, came to the fore in the late 19th century at the face of opening the country to the much wider world than ever before. It is noteworthy that the term hanbok has been used in the modern fashion history timeline from 1900 onwards. And I review the components that constitute women's hanbok ensemble, such as Sogori, 치마, 구름, 깃, 동정, and 놀이개, tracing back some surviving artifacts from as early as late Goryeo period. And as a particularly transformative period, I stressed the end of Joseon from the 17th century to the turn of the 20th century, which saw significantly indigenous development into the archetype of modern hanbok silhouette with short jogori and long and voluminous 치마. Then I showed contemporary fashion collection inspired by women's hanbok elements by a Western designer brand, Carolina Herrera, as well as a work by Korean designer Jin Tae-ok. Those brought to light the path of hanbok, not only illustrating attributes of preserved tradition and cultural continuity, but also embodying dynamism of modern transformation in the production system, material, technique, and meaning of the clothing. As the second of 4 lectures, today's talk focuses on men's hanbok with continuing approaches to defying conventional notions on traditional dress. Here are the 2 key themes. First is fashion, second is cultural authentication. First, this lecture will offer a few fascinating scenes on men's head, chin strap, and coats to illuminate fashion in Korean men's dress and adornment practices. This exploration will challenge the following 2 points. First, we tend to think men were less interested in fashion and adorning their body than women. And second, fashion in dress has long been studied as a product of Western capitalism in modern industrialized world. Therefore, fashion did not exist in the rest of the world, and dress history in other cultures, so to speak, non-Western dress history has been received as static and stagnant. But this is not true. By ongoing researches on non-Western fashion cases for the past few decades, this long-believed notion has been challenged and reevaluated. In the same vein, today's talk with Korean men's fashion cases aims to contribute to disproving this long-held misconception. Second, traditional dress is generally viewed as a result of authentic and indigenous development within the specific race or country. As such, Hanbok is deemed as authentic Korean dress, in other words, of undisputed origin in Korea. However, what should not be overlooked here is the transnational transmission of clothing items in the development of dress culture in a larger regional context. In that regard, cultural authentication theory by Joanne B. Eicher and Tonia Vieira Cosima provide insightful perspective. So I will talk about how men's hanbok items exemplify cultural authentication processes. So with these key themes in mind, let me begin with these three images. On the left, you see a typical late 18th century Joseon gentleman's outfit. Joseon is the last pre-colonial dynasty in Korean history that existed from 1392 to 1910. I will mostly mention Joseon period in the pre-modern context or in reference to tradition. In the middle, two old gentlemen encounter in Seoul. It was 2 months after Korea's liberation from Japan in 1945. Korea was liberated in August 1945. On the right is the typical 20th century men's hanbok ensemble. We may think men's fashion did not undergo conspicuous trend, but even this 18th century gentleman's appearance clearly displays the extravagant elements amidst the current of fashion. What do you notice? The beaded chin strap did not have to be this long if it were only to be practical. And the hat he is wearing is called gat. Gat was Joseon men's the most popular hat for outing. And in this hat, you can tell the brim of the gat became narrower when it came to the 20th century. Gat was made of woven horsehair, oxtail hair, or extremely thin bamboo splits. The crown part of the gat is called daewoo, and the brim is called yangtae in Korean. During the late 17th to 19th century, the width of yangtae, marked as A here, ranged from 64 to 72.3 centimeter. The width of yangtae is ranged like this, and then the height of daewoo ranged from 19 to 20.4 centimeter, around 20 centimeter. And this relatively wide and tall gat becomes narrower and smaller in the late 19th to 20th century. During this period, the width of yangtae was 25 to 44.5 centimeter, and the height of daewoo was under 16 centimeter. Because gat was the most popularly worn hat, manufacturing of gat thrived in the Joseon dynasty. So it's not unnatural to see fashion changes in the width of yangtae and height of daewoo. And these are the surviving long beaded chin straps of gat dating to 16th to 17th century. The beaded materials were semi-precious gems like amber, coral, crystal, agate, tortoise shell, carapace, etc. and it grew longer and longer to the extent of reaching the wearer's knees. As artifacts housed in the United States, on the left is a rare example of earlier period tall and wide gat from Brooklyn Museum. On the right is a narrow and small gat of later period housed in Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. Regarding the ostentatious fashion of wide brim, the late 18th century Joseon intellectual Lee Deok-moo lamented in his anthology, quote, "If anyone abruptly stood up in a small swinging boat, the tip of yangtae bumped into others' forehead. When dining together at a small table, a tip of yangtae poked others' eye. It is embarrassing to see many people gather wearing a wide and tall gat because they all look like dwarfs," unquote. His note sounds obnoxious, but absolutely alludes to the occurrence of fashion in Joseon gentleman's head. Also, gat was one of the sources of Korean inspiration for Carolina Herrera's 2011 Spring-Summer collection. The collection's creative director was Hervé Pierre, who later gained more fame with Melania Trump's white inaugural gown design. He asked New York-based milliner Albertus Swanepoel to create hats inspired by gat. Swanepoel was initially asked to make out of bamboo splits, but it was too costly, so he used Swiss braids. In 2019, gat became more widely known to the world during the hit of the Netflix drama series Kingdom, set in early 17th century Joseon. The gat certainly added charismatic vibe to the character. Since then, even Amazon has been carrying gat for Halloween costume. For those who would like to learn more about gat and other Korean men's hats, I introduce this English version, well-made book and video. Going through dynastic histories, Korea had maintained highly sophisticated, bureaucratic, and stratified society. And in that society, it was men rather than women who were primarily imposed on numerous tenets and regulations of refined dress and adornment practices. Diverse style of coats and headdresses were de rigueur among Joseon literati, prescribed by NeoConfucianism. NeoConfucianism is the philosophical and ideological orderly system that governed every aspect of Joseon society. One of the doctrines related to dress practice was 의관정제, meaning to dress proper set of clothing and headdress at all occasions, even in one's own private room. Neo-Confucianism also segregated men and women, so only men could freely engage in social life, which resulted in creation of diverse styles of coats and robes. Each of them had different name. So all these coats were worn during the Joseon period, but these are not all. There are much more. However, these coats died out at the end of the 19th century by the successive government mandates of banning them, only excluding durumagi, which has narrow sleeves. The literal meaning of durumagi is that all the coat seam lines are closed, no slits at the side seams or center back seam. Back to this slide. So the two gentlemen met in 1945, and they are wearing the same kind of coat, durumagi, because durumagi was the only choice for coat for who lived through the turmoil of the end of Joseon and the colonial period. but their heads are different. Between the two, who looks older? The man on the right looks older than the left. While the old man is wearing a traditional gat, the younger looking man is wearing a new Western style bowler hat. For his feet, Western socks and shoes took the place of traditional socks and shoes. So these two old gentlemen's slightly different fashion show transition of the dress code of the time. Undergoing the colonial period, modern civilization processes were transplanted in Korea with changes of daily wear in a European fashion. That increased processes of transforming the existing dress code. Hanbok was already being hybridized with foreign elements from the time when the term Hanbok began to be used. Such hybridization is also evident in the ensemble worn under the jurumagi, seen in the image on the right. This 20th century hanbok is composed of 4 items: Paji, pants; Sogori, top; 조끼, vest or waistcoat; and Magoza, cardigan type jacket. So these composed 20th century hanbok ensemble. Men's Sogori is also T-shaped upper garment, structured same as women's Sogori, with bodice, sleeve, 섭, 깃, 동정, and 고름. While women's Sogori got gradually cropped toward the turn of the 20th century, the length of men's Sogori did not get affected by the trend occurred in women's Sogori. And both of these Sogori are of the last generation Joseon royal couple, Crown Prince Uimin and his wife Crown Princess Uimin, also known as 영친왕 and 이방자 여사. These date back to perhaps after their marriage in 1920. You may find this length of Sogori style in the Apple TV series Pachinko now. Today, men's Sogori did not change much from this style, though. In most cases of modern men's Sogori, 고름 is being taken off, replaced by a knot button, because men always wear more items over the Sogori. So it is inconvenient to have 고름 under. Next is Paji. Korean men's pants Paji are very baggy. No consideration on fitting to the body shape like Western slacks. The excess fabric at the waist and ankle are fastened by fabric sashes. Hanbok Paji is also cut uniquely asymmetrical structure, with the large piece on the wearer's right leg, while smaller piece goes on the left leg. So this is not symmetrical. So when you wear baji, you have to be careful. The large piece goes on your right leg, and this is uniquely structured. This side piece, rectangular side piece, is called marupok, and baji with this kind of structure is called sapok baji. Sapok baji might have been worn from much earlier time, but the oldest sapok baji survived from the early 17th century. And it has unique structure, and this unique seam lines in sapok baji play an instrumental role as a guide to folding and fastening the waist and ankle. Before you tie the waistband, the waist should be folded along this seam line between marupok and 큰 sapok. That means a large piece. If anyone in the audience learned music, you may have heard every note counts. That means every note has a meaning So you have to play each note with interpretation on what it means in the passage. As such, I find meaning in the seam lines in Hanbok. As American fashion designer Charles James also said, quote, "All my seams have meaning. They emphasize something about the body," unquote. And it seems Carolina Herrera's 2011 Spring-Summer collection took a cue from the way in which Hanbok Paji is folded at the waist. So this is how it is folded and fastened at the waist, and it resonates in these following works. To ease the complicated method of tying the waistband, nowadays Western sewing notions, hook and eye closures, and a zipper are being used. And this shows how to tie ankle bands. Again, seam lines play a role here. This seam line is meant to be aligned to the inner ankle bone to be properly tied by the ankle band called denim. However, this practice is now vanishing because denim has been being replaced by knot buttons and pants were tapered toward the bottom. So now there's no such a fixed traditional way of constructing hanbok as modern techniques constantly infiltrated into the hidden details of hanbok construction to enhance look, comfort, and convenience of wearing. Moving on to jokgi. So this is the order you wear men's hanbok. You wear baji first, and then sogori, and jokgi is worn. So jokgi is worn over a sogori. However, isn't it weird to see a Western waistcoat in the hanbok ensemble? This photo shows Joseon envoys visiting Moscow for the coronation ceremony of Nicholas II of Russia in 1896. And all the Korean envoys, Joseon envoys, are wearing traditional garments. However, only the translator is wearing Western suit. So wide acceptance of Western suit had a direct impact on the composition of men's hanbok. The convenience of pockets in the Western waistcoat was the foremost charm that captivated Joseon men. They loved carrying tobacco and other necessities in these pockets, and they called it hojumoni, literally meaning barbarian's pouch. The waistcoat was made with traditional fabric and incorporated into men's hanbok ensemble in the 20th century. There was a sleeveless item called beja worn in Joseon previously, as you see in this genre painting and a hereditary artifact. But beja had no pockets. We cannot say jokgi has evolved from beja because jokgi was transplanted from the West. So Western jokgi incorporated into hanbok ensemble truly encapsulates the great shifts in fashion and society of the time. Next, Magoza. Magoza is a cardigan type jacket closed by two big buttons, but in this Magoza, buttons are taken off. Magoza is also a foreign origin item transformed from Magua of Qing, China. It is known that King Gojong's father, Daewon-gun, spread Magoza fashion after his return to Joseon in 1887 from his detained life in Tianjin, China. In this photo, Daewon-gun, the King Gojong's father, is wearing a Chinese coat called Changfugua. Changfugua and Magua both are closed at the center front using buttons, frog buttons, but Changfugua has long sleeves and long length, but Magua has short sleeves and shorter length. And it is said Magua transformed from Magoza transformed from Magua. But Magoza became an essential component, just as joki, in modern Hanbok ensemble for over a century. Whenever I talk about Magoza in the class, I am reminded of an essay entitled Magoza that I learned in high school. But I never had enough time to share the essay with the class. Since today's lecture is dedicated to solely men's Hanbok, of which Magoza has been an indispensable part, I feel like to share this beautiful essay with the audience. And this essay also resonates with the concept of cultural authentication, which soon I will explain. This essay is written by Yoon Oh-young, the phenomenal essayist in South Korea in the 20th century. I could not figure out when it was exactly written, but certainly before 1974. Magoza by Yoon Oh-young, quote, "Whenever I wear a Magoza, I'm in awe of Korean women's sewing skills. Amongst all men's clothing items, Magoza showcases the highest extravagance. Magoza is made of more luxurious fabric than those for Paji, Sogori, and durumagi. Also, Magoza buttons are the only jewels in men's Hanbok ensemble. One wears Magoza to look modish, not to get warmth. To get warmed, one would wear another layer of Sogori and sable fur-lined Sogori. If a silk Magoza was patterned too loudly or padded with cotton wadding, that would go out of style. An unostentatious silk Magoza, which is lined, is the best. The top of Magoza, this part, should just slightly overlap at the center, either not too deeply overlap or easily open. The side hemline, this part, should be delicately curved. Even a mere dullness would blemish. The neckline should be rendered subtly, neither straight nor too curved. The lining of Magoza should tightly stay under. The lining should be never visible from the outside in order to display a perfect aesthetic curve of the contour. Just considering these elements, one would realize how challenging to achieve desired craftsmanship in making Magoza. It has been said that Magoza originated from Magua from Qing, China. However, Magoza totally differs from Magua. It is not even similar to Magua. Magoza fits perfectly with Hanbok, however, cannot go with Chinese clothing. Magoza is our unique clothing that manifests Korean women's sophisticated artistry in cutting, sewing, and shaping fabric. Magoza evokes soigné and elegant vibes. It displays refined and delicate workmanship. From generation to generation, our women have long worked to be adept at creating clothing with aesthetic sensibility so apt to Korean. If they had not passed on the prowess, I could not have enjoyed this natty Magoza. Every aspect of culture is like this. Although other culture surges into our country, if only our own insights and craftsmanship are robust in our own tradition, we can digest the foreign elements to build a new culture that can be completely ours. Close the quote. This essay offers the author's insights as a wearer into Magoza's core artistry, origin, and adaptation to Korean life, and connects them to a larger theme of processing foreign cultural elements. As aforementioned, Jokgi and Magoza are the foreign origin new additions to the composition of 20th century Hanbok ensemble. The dress scholars, such as Susan Beiserman, Joan B. Eicher, Catherine Czerny, asserted, quote, ethnic dress may include borrowed items from other cultures that result in a distinctly identifiable ethnic ensemble if the new elements are culturally authenticated, unquote. What does the culturally authenticated mean? The concept of cultural authentication was defined by Joan B. Eicher and Tony Vieira Cosima in 1981 in the research of weaving practice of Calabar people in Nigeria, and it was developed as a theory as well to apply to, quote, specific articles and ensembles of dress identified as ethnic and considered indigenous, but the users are not the makers or the material used is not indigenous in origin, unquote. And they suggested 4 levels of cultural authentication processes, from the stage of simple selection to giving characterization, to incorporation into existing ensemble, and to eventual transformation. So Jokgi and Magoza are clear in that they are the borrowed items from other cultures, but culturally authenticated in Korea during the modern times. I find this cultural authentication theory provides really important insight into how Hanbok was reconfigured at the threshold of modernization of Korea. By the same token, the late anthropologist Jane Schneider, in her article, Cloth and Clothing, stressed, quote, iconic elements of ethnicity in ethnic dress are not themselves emblems of an authentic cultural heritage, unquote, and pointed out symbolically and materially transformative properties of quote unquote traditional dress. The authors of The Politics of Dress in Asia and Americas, Louis Edwards and Mina Roses, also negate authenticity of traditional dress, asserting, quote, national dress such as terno, aodai, and chipao was and is hybrid dress, unquote. So I hope these voices would refresh our conventional perspective of viewing traditional dress as an essence of tradition or epitome of tradition, and make us critically think about what tradition really means to us. What is even more interesting is that from the turn of the 21st century, the 2 foreign components, Jokgi and Magoza, have been being eliminated from the ensemble because beza, the traditional vest, has made a comeback. While the 4 items, Paji, Sogori, Jokgi, Magoza, these 4-item Hanbok ensemble remained as older generation's style as continued practice from the 20th century. So in this picture, this older generation is wearing the 4-item Hanbok ensemble with Paji, Sogori, Jokgi, and Magoza. But younger generation opts for the simplified version with beza, Paji, Sogori, and beza, 3-item. So the transformation of Hanbok goes on, involving not only modern techniques and systems, but also visits to its own past. Finally, this portrait of a Joseon official from the Metropolitan Museum of Art collection. This portrait has so many layers of story to tell us. The outfit of the figure features a court uniform, the most coveted look by Joseon men as a signifier of wearer's social status in the highly hierarchical society based on NeoConfucianism. In this ensemble, elements such as the color of the court robe, the pattern of the rank badge, the material of the rank belt, articulated the wearer's social identity. So within the court officials' social circle, each of them instantly recognized who is higher and who is lower in rank through the lens of clothing. Once obtained the status, the fully dressed up figure was portrayed for the purpose of familiar or scholastic commemorative rituals. In light of today's key themes, the court uniform does reiterate fashion and cultural authentication. There were stylistic changes in the height of the head, the shape of the head's wing, the curve of the neckband, and the width of sleeves of the robe, etc. So this court uniform also underwent fashion changes. And in terms of cultural authentication, this style court robe originated in West Asia and was transmitted to Korea via China at the latest 7th century, and it has been worn in Korea for more than 14 centuries, really, really long time, during which it made full processes of cultural authentication. During the Joseon Dynasty, as much as a government official was aspired to be entitled in their earthly life, when they were buried, the deceased was most notably dressed in the robe, marking his highest social position. Many cases of archaeologically discovered clothing in the course of tomb relocations disclose mummies dressed in a court robe, as you see in this image. For commoners, the court ensemble was allowed to wear once in a lifetime for groom's wedding attire. The reverence of court uniform passed on to today's Payback ceremony as well. Payback ceremony is the traditional way of paying respect to each other's family, followed by their westernized wedding ceremony. So the long endured history of court uniform mirrors Korea's pre-modern past well into the present. Through the several cases of traditional clothing items that were culturally authenticated in Korea, I would like all of us to think about what origin of clothing means to us in consideration of mobility of fashion. Today, we all wear global fashion originated from the West. What does it mean to us? And how much does it mean to us? Renowned South Korean designer Lee Sang-bong, who also has a boutique in New York City, claims, quote, "Although came from the West, if we have worn them for over a century, they are our clothing," unquote. So I wrap up today's talk, leaving some food for thoughts on fashion and cultural authentication to you. The unfinished story of court uniform will continue in the third lecture on July 21st. I hope everyone can join again. Thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, and once again for this fascinating lecture. Once again, I just feel like I just learned so much. For example, I had no idea that the men's Paji had two completely different sides. And speaking of which, actually, we have a question from a viewer who asked about all the extra fabrics. It seems like when we discussed women's clothing, that the use of too much fabric was always a cost concern, and that's why the Sogoris got shorter and shorter. But there seems to be not that much of a concern for the excessive use of fabric. So do you think there's gender issue played here, or what do you think why do you think, was there any other reasons for the pants to have such so much fabric?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason. There's kind of a gender issue between the men and women, and usually, if you are in the social realm, you have to show how much you are affordable for that excess fabric, excess use of fabric. So the sleeves are really wide, and as I showed you, Durumagi has narrow sleeves, but most of kinds of other coats and robes have really wide sleeves. And if you examine Chinese clothing, they have really wide sleeves. Sometimes it reaches like the bottom of the floor. It just touches the floor. That much excessive fabric. So that kind of displayed their social status, and also Paji. In terms of Paji, I am also curious why they didn't make kind of tapered Paji, because even the folk costume for the farmers, 농악, that is kind of 농악 people also wear kind of baggy baji, but they use 행전. 행전 is kind of a piece of fabric, a rectangular shape of fabric that fastened their shin. So their baji was pretty baggy, but they used a piece of fabric to fasten their calf area. So that just facilitated their practicality. So baji was pretty baggy, but when you think of Korean lifestyle, they usually sit down like crisscross applesauce, on the floor. So, and then they eat like that, and then they play games like sitting on the floor. So that with that reason, baji was pretty baggy, and yeah.
Very interesting. So all these things that you never really thought about. And then there's also, I think cut has been the source of fascination for a lot of people, a lot of non-Koreans. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about cut too, because you mentioned the how important it was to be properly dressed for the Korean male, whether you are out in the public or in private sphere. And so why was it so important to cover their head with either kat or the other type of headgears that you showed us?
Yeah, in East Asia, having top knot has been considered as marker of civilization. So it's long history. So they cared for their hair. How they groom their hair was kind of showing their civilized status. So they made their hair with top knot, and they covered their hair. And also that is imbued with Confucianism as well, because every stuff in your body is inherited from your parents. So cutting the hair is kind of against filial piety. So that was a very respected notion. So people did not want to cut their hair who were strongly lived in the Neo-Confucian society, especially Confucian scholars and the gentry class men really strongly resisted when the cutting hair ordinance decreed in the end of 19th century.
So you don't want to cut your hair, but you also want to appear Neat and presentable.
Yes, yes. 의관정제 means, yeah, you have to wear proper set of clothing and headdress at all occasions. So even when you are, yeah, nowadays when we are in our room and study, then we don't have to dress up, but they dressed up. So we can still see many portraits in their room. They are so neatly dressed, and yeah.
But then did they have any other functions, such as somebody just asked if, for example, when we think of hats these days, it's to protect your face from the sun. Did hat provide any sort of environmental protections?
Probably it provided some environment protection, but mostly it was kind of ritual, kind of their as a courtesy. Yeah, as a courtesy, they wear headdress all the time.
Got it. So it's more a sign of respect and propriety.
Yeah, propriety. Yeah.
Got it. And then how about the colors? When we talked about women's clothing, we talked about different colors, married women would wear versus unmarried women. Was there any meaning behind colors that men wore? Many of the images you showed us, they tend to be more muted, sort of the white or very pale colors. So can you tell us a little bit about the colors?
The coats or robes worn at home were probably not that dictated by the regulation, but definitely for court uniform was prescribed by law, regulation. So it was the most significant difference between pre-modern dress practice and modern dress practice is kind of in the pre-modern period, everything was prescribed by the law and regulation, and those were codified into law. So everybody was kind of restricted by the regulation, dress regulation. But now we are really free, and every individual is free to choose their own clothing. So for court uniform, there were different colors for different rank. So from 1 to 3, you wear purple, and then and the below is wearing is supposed to wear blue or something like that. So the color. So when you watch the Korean historical drama, you see many different color of court uniform.
And that only the king can wear the red and things like that, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. But then, as you said, the court uniforms are widely worn by people for their wedding ceremonies. So was that a practice? You just said like a lot of things were regulated and prescribed. Was that a regular practice during the Joseon period that people could wear the court uniform? I'm assuming that that's not the case. So when did that practice begin? That sort of using the court wear as sort of like kind of a formal wear for men for very special occasions?
I believe court uniform existed since 7th century, but as a groom's wedding attire, I can confirm it's the end of Joseon period, so very late. So late 19th century, only commoners were allowed to wear the court uniform for only wedding ceremony.
Or only wedding ceremony.
Yeah. And then for that, if you cannot afford to have it, there were communal use. So in the village, there was one court uniform that can be circulated for the men's wedding. So.
And then somebody asked a very practical question about traditionally, how were the garments washed or laundered? Were they disassembled and then put them back together? Do we know any of the laundry practice?
Yes, that kind of thing I mentioned in last lecture. So when you rewind the last lecture, then you can find the Paji Sogori, 물겹 Sogori or 물겹 Sogori. Yeah. Then you can find very sheer Sogori. It shows all the seams, the thick seams, not trimmed. So in that case, it was all unsewn before laundry, and they washed it and resew all the parts, and they made a new Sogori. But so that's for particular type of Sogori and particular type of durumagi or something like that. But usually commoners' clothing was made with cotton or rami or hemp. So they just washed in the river or, yeah.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the series Pachinko, which is a lot of people are enjoying, it seems. But somebody asked about sort of the use of dye, how the clothing was dyed and what kind of natural, I mean, we are assuming that long time ago, they were natural dyes. And there seemed to be very subtle colors that were used, at least in the TV series that we watch. So what kind of process, what kind of materials were used if people wanted to add colors to their clothing?
Oh, of course, indigo for blue and red for it's the Korean name is Honghwa, but I don't know how it is translated. But it's flower, and you get white color, red color. So, and you dye over time, then you will get a darker color. And if you dye just once or twice, then you get lighter color. So there was kind of the color shade, and there was differentiation for kind of pink or red or purple, something like that. So, so all natural dyes before the aniline or the chemical dye was introduced in Korea.
Yeah, like plant-based, basically.
Yes, yes, yes. And also an interesting practice in Korea is they use different color for lining. Usually they use different color traditionally for lining and the main fabric, different color. Then you will see subtle combination of the kind of the mixed color.
That's nice. And then you also pointed out when you were showing us the the old photograph of the two gentlemen right after the liberation, you pointed out the different shoes that they were wearing. One was wearing more modern, contemporary, I guess, Western style shoes, but the other one was wearing more the traditional Korean style shoes. So can you tell us a little bit about what type of shoes people wore, say, in the 19th century, and what kind of material were used?
Usually leathers and straw for commoners, and the military officials wear kind of boots that is usually made of deer skin, and yeah, and sometimes they make wood for rainy days. Namakshin is made of wood for rainy days, and yeah, and sometimes they make like spikes under the sole to not to slip off. So yeah, those kind of techniques.
Yeah. And then we talked about all these different occasions that, such as weddings and court appearances. I mean, to call it a fashion may not be the right word, but what was the funeral practices like for the Koreans? What was the funeral color like? Obviously, in the West, we think of dark colors, black as the color of mourning. But can you tell us a little bit about the funeral practices in Korea? Or I should say, funeral practices in the old days.
Yeah. I don't know the whole period of 2,000 years, but at the end of Joseon, it was white for funeral practice. So everybody had to wear white when King Gojong passed away. So and it's so long time. So the regulation was the duration was so long. So everybody had to wear white for a long time because of the regulation. And that was more seen like Koreans are wearing white at the end of the Joseon period. And you saw the portrait, right? The head is called samo, and samo is usually black, but when it comes to the kings pass away, they have to wear white samo. So white head, white clothing, and everything has to be white. White is the funeral. Yeah.
So how long was the mourning period? You said it was a very long time that everyone had to wear white. How long was that mourning period? Do you know?
I don't exactly know about the period for the king or for the father or for the kind of, it depends on the who died, but it will vary depending on the relations to the deceased.
Got it. Well, and that's all we have for tonight. So thanks again to Dr. Minjee Kim for joining us today and for another fascinating look into the Korean traditional clothing called Hanbok. And we look forward to your third lecture, which is scheduled for July 21st, in which you will talk about more sort of the official clothings, I believe, of the royal courts, which I think a lot of our viewers may be very interested because they might be very familiar with that sort of fashion from the K-dramas. So please mark your calendar and make sure you join us again in July. Special thanks to Peter, our IT director, for making this live webcast a possibility, and to our interns, Subin and Caitlin, for getting all the questions and doing all the social media postings and email outreach. And of course, our thanks to you, our viewers and members. We hope you'll join us again. Check out what's coming up on our website, koreasociety.org, where you can sign up to receive our emails or join us as a member, and make sure you like and subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you, Jay.